A bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, certainly. Well, my name is Kyle Smith, and I am a clarity consultant. And what I do is I help folks uh, rewrite their narratives or their thoughts in order to be able to get unstuck, celebrate wins and progress, and be able to create goals or outcomes that they are excited to pursue. And I do that through a practice that I call NLSE. And the program that I have is for fellas. It's called the Supra Being Blueprint. It's pretty sweet.
Mate, let's start here then. Clarity consultant, and the NLSE. When I looked into it, is that neuro linguistic somatic experience, right?
Yep.
That's right, is it?
Yeah,
Cool.
it is.
Um, sounds very complicated to me, and I've never heard of it before. So, if I asked you to kind of explain it to a dummy like me, or like an 8-year-old or something, how would you break that down?
Sure. NLSE, Neuro Linguistic Somatic Experience, is a practice that combines story work and breath work in order to have an outcome, or it is an outcomes focused practice rather than a problems focused practice. So it's a top down approach. We start with the head, we start with the words and the stories, and then we go into the breath to be able to get everything working together and integrated. And by everything, I mean emotions, stories, goals, our self image, our identity or mindset. I like to call mind or say that mindset is the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves or our opinion of ourselves. And so it's a way to be able to flesh things out, really. It's a way to flesh things out, top to bottom approach. It's outcomes focused, and it's practical. People practice it, participate in it, and they feel the changes as they go, real time. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds pretty cool actually, because words, I suppose, really kind of dictate the reality that we experience, right? We're always got this kind of self-talk going on, and we're always, I don't know about you, but I'm always pretty negative with mine.
I used to be. I would say that I used to be. I would. So in 2016, that was a time where I wanted to make a pivot, and I did not like the character that I was at that point, and I didn't like my internal dialogue. I didn't like where my thoughts were taking me at that point in time. So I just went down a road and a path that I ended up finding a way to rewrite my negative narratives or harmful stories and turn them into helpful stories. Because the negative narratives are, some of them could be other people's. So someone else told us that we are this. And so thought, oh, okay, they're obviously correct. And so we adopt a story, adopt a narrative, adopt a belief. And so when we introduce NLSE, it's assisting folks in getting them to think about their thinking and being able to rebut or rebut or have a rebuttal for negative narratives. So let's say, for example, you wake up in the morning and you're looking in the mirror and you're like, let's say I say it. I look in the mirror and I'm like, I suck. Or the narrative is, you suck. So I'm projecting it outwards. And then some folks can have one of two options. The first option is, yep, you're right. I do suck. I'm just going to go along the rest of my day and I'm just going to suck tomorrow too. And then there's the other part where when we think about our thinking, we can combat that. It's like, well, what evidence do you have that I suck? Or it could go in the opposite direction where, no, I actually don't, because I have evidence to prove that I am doing the things that I say I'm going to do and I'm living in alignment with that. So I'm behaving with integrity. And yeah, when we're able to rebuke those negative narratives and confront them rather than just simply accept them, then we can actually wipe it away and declutter it rather than allowing it to linger there and for us to stew on whatever that thought is. Because every day we have about 60,000 of the exact same thoughts each day. And so 60,000 of our thoughts, if let's say 20% of them, even not even 20, let's go higher, let's go crazy. Let's say 70% of them are negative narratives. It's likely that they had the exact same thoughts yesterday, and it's likely that they may have the same thoughts without intervention tomorrow. So rewriting those narratives, man.
Kyle, that's quite interesting. Actually, I did a little bit of research before the show, and so the National Science Foundation found that 80% of thoughts are negative,
Yeah.
which is like obviously you touched on that. That was pretty accurate from you anyway. But like that for me, I was shocked by that figure.
That's crazy.
Like, I thought it would be, 50-50 maybe some people kind of edge towards 60-40, and then some people let 60-40 in the positive, but to be 80%, that's huge.
That's well, yeah, it's crazy because then it's I'm thinking of the 80-20 rule where it's like it's 20% of the thoughts being positive. That's that's toasty. Yeah, I think well, the 80-20 rule. So 20% of those negative narrative or no, I'm not organizing myself really well on this one. It's I don't think I don't think it has to be 80%, and I also do think that I think it's a theme and not a trend. It's a common thing I think nowadays. And I think for a couple reasons. One is that we have a negativity bias, so we veer towards negativity naturally. And then I also think that the way that, let's say, a societal structure is, where it's organizing scarcity and fear to prevent people from making progress. Because I think that even from school all the way up, there's more, there's detentions, there's pressure if you don't get your homework sent in. There's all these things where it's like, oh, there's so many uh, negatives. If I try this, or if I do this, or if I don't do this, I'm just going to get shit on. And that sucks. And I think that that's something that is adopted because earlier on, I think that we are taught what to think rather than how to think. And that's a dangerous place to be because then we're not deciding for ourselves what our beliefs are. We're just adopting those beliefs, similar to what I said earlier.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong there. I think, we kind of push a narrative onto kids, and then that's kind of reinforced throughout life, really, through, different means, through work and everything else. But it's quite interesting because, like, even the news is negative all the time, and like all the stuff that we consume, there's so much negativity all the time. Especially in the UK, I don't know about Canada, but in the UK, we have this kind of really negative culture where we're just kind of, yeah, everything's shit, but it is what it is, and we get on with it. That's
Yeah,
kind of that's kind of the attitude that we have here. I don't know where that comes from, but that's what we do.
I think it's a. I think I think the weather can also influence that quite a bit. And Chris Williamson said something along those lines where uh, the difference between where because he's in Texas now, I believe, where there
Yeah.
is a level of optimism that he had not experienced when he was back in the UK. So I think it's definitely like figuring out the surroundings that you're in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do notice that, whenever I go away or in the summertime when it is nice on the rare occasion, it definitely the weather definitely lifts my mood. Be that like serotonin or wherever it is, but it definitely lifts my mood and has a positive effect on my outlook on life, I suppose.
Hmm. Totally.
So it's quite strange. And then another statistic that I found while we're on statistics, 95% of the thoughts that people have are repetitive.
Yeah, totally. And I agree with that one too. Because
Yeah, it's
something,
wild.
and oh, thoughts popped out on that one too. So 95% of our thoughts are habitual. There is a, I'm not much of a gamer, but I like watching, not but, and I like watching gameplay while I'm working. So if I'm doing computer work, I'll just watch gameplay rather than playing the game. I like the storylines. And there's this one that I was watching, and it was or it was God of War Ragnarok. It was the second God of War. It's freaking sick. Like it's literally like watching a movie. And there's this part in the game where they're going to the Norse Sisters of Fate. I forget what they're called. So they went to the Norse Sisters of Fate. They wanted to change their fate, of course. And during this dialogue, during this conversation, the leader of the three witches, she said that we don't create the future. We simply look back to see what someone is likely to do. So if we look back to our past, we're able to have a really good indicator of what we're going to do tomorrow. And so if we have 95% of our thoughts that are repetitive and those are harming us rather than helping us, that's not going to lead to a very fulfilling life. It would be so those repetitive thoughts, rewriting, rewiring, organizing them, translating them from harmful to helpful, would be able to take that 95% and, well, imagine if you had 95% of your thoughts being positive rather than that 80% of thoughts being negative, or having the habit of having that positive conversation with yourself. Dude, that alone would alleviate so much pressure, stress, anxiety, annoyance, irritation, agitation. And I think that that's actually easier than folks think, in my opinion.
Yeah, but like you say, I suppose it's a habit in it, and to do it the other way, and to get into that kind of when you're in a habit, it's hard to break a habit usually, isn't it? But equally,
Totally.
I think there must be something to it. It must be kind of evolutionary as well, right? Because we had so I had this conversation with somebody the other day where, like, if a bush shakes and there's a lion in there or a snake or whatever it might be, right? It's a bad thing, and that happens once. You probably, whenever a bush shakes, you're probably going to leg it, and that will save you 90% of the time. Where if you're curious and you wait to find out all the time, you're going to die and get killed off. So the people who were a bit more cautious and scared and negative probably survived longer. So survival wise, it probably made sense.
Hmm.
And I suppose our brains haven't evolved to modern society now, where we're relatively safe,
Totally.
compared to how we used to be. Um, and I think maybe that's a part of it, but that's just anecdotal. That's not. I have no evidence to back that up. I'm just how my mind works.
No, I think you're onto something there, because it makes sense that we would have a negativity bias. Like, what if there's a saber-toothed tiger in that bush? And you hit the nail on the head where you said that it made sense back in the day. And now, the way that I see is that we have an evolutionary mismatch where our hardware is designed and programmed for survivability. So cautiousness. So if I was out in the woods by myself, then it would be appropriate for me to have a negativity bias and to make sure I'm not going to die. So that cautiousness would serve me. However, I think that in the uh, in areas of development like cities, we have less threats around, and I also think that because we have that scarcity brain, we're driven towards accumulating resources, because resources back in the day equals survivability. And the more we had, the better it was. However, now it's never been easier to get more. And I believe that because of that, uh, because of the decrease in threats, there's more time for people to think. And that's the part that I think that we're working on right now, thinking for themselves, thinking about our thinking. And so then we actually utilize that free time that we wouldn't have had back in the day, that would be allocated to survival. Now we actually have the opportunity to be able to do the things we want and prevent a disorganized life. So we move towards, let's say, entropy, psychic entropy, where naturally veer towards disorder, and we have to impose order in order to move forward with our progress. And so, order and creating order, the subjective individual creating order within their own environment, is going to veer away from that entropy, which is also going to veer away from negativity bias, because we're thinking accurately rather than simply in hypotheticals. So we could have the negativity of, what if I get fired? Then the idea is, would it be so bad? Because I hear you complain about it all the time. And so
Yeah.
so
And
it's a
that's
fun
the
one.
thing, isn't it? I don't know if kind of being fired or losing your job, which, that I, I speak in generalities, but generally speaking, there's a lot of work out there. So we're probably not going to starve. We're probably not going to be homeless, and it's probably not going to be a threat to our survival, which is what triggers us all the time, isn't it? And what triggers us into that kind of stress and negative response.
Totally.
So, but people will kind of stick out these jobs that they hate and stay with it out of fear, ultimately, of fear of not finding anything better, fear of losing status in the pecking order, which again probably ties back into evolution, where within the group, if you're higher up the pecking order, you get more food probably, or first to get the food at least, and kind of those kind of things, which will again enhance your chances to survive. And ultimately, we're cavemen who our brains designed for sitting in caves eating berries all day long and staying away from predators, and we're trying to now navigate this complex world, and our brains haven't caught up yet.
You know what? I actually have a theory on this one too. With how is the scarcity brain? Uh, I think that our external world is evolving faster than our physical evolution. Our bodies are going to evolve very slowly. However, I think that with the increase in speed, I think is less from a physical evolution and more of a evolution of consciousness. Whereas it's all up in here on this one. And
Yeah.
to be able to, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I've got a bit of a theory that is absolutely not grounded in any science at all, and it might be just absolutely wild. But because there's an increase in kind of neurodiversity now, right? ADHD and kind of the the neurodiversities, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot more of it than there used to be, and I think that is related in part to the amount of information that we're taking in. And I think
Yeah.
that's because like since sort of the internet became mass spread, handheld devices, and access to so much information so quickly, all the time in your pocket, and kids are having it younger and younger. I think it's just that so much information that the brain's just trying to rewire itself to try to deal with it all.
Ooh, I I agree with your theory. I'll pivot it in a little bit because I have a theory on it as well. Because I could say for certain, because I'm not a diagnosed, I'm not official on the ADHD. However, I've done a couple of the online tests and I'm in the red.
Oh, same.
However,
I scored 97%.
bro,
I'm
fuck
off the chart.
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm 120. No, just joking. Just wild. I actually agree with a solid chunk of it uh, where you can see an increase in, okay, yeah, I'll go through it. You can see an increase in ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, uh, from the 90s, and it's been consistently going up. Just, it's honestly, if it was like, oh, ADHD, that's a stock. If you invested in it in the 90s, you'd be making bank now.
No, because every stock I invest in just plummets instantly. So
Yeah,
I could have stopped the whole thing.
yeah, exactly. So with the theory, I think that how I was mentioning where our brains are evolving in alignment with our society or the our surroundings and the architecture and the software that's coming up, I think that it's much more of an evolutionary component. And I'll also counter attention because I don't believe attention's the issue. Because I know a lot of people that have been diagnosed or undiagnosed and they just say they have ADHD. And what, like, who hasn't binged at least 3 to 4 hours of Netflix? That to me, or video games. How many hours of video games do people play on average?
Oh man, they just suck you in, don't they? And then you just down a rabbit hole for hours. You lose track of time completely.
Totally. And that's flow, right? So it's not negative feels, it's the intentionality behind the activity. So for example, I don't think that it's attention deficit disorder, it's intention deficit disorder. It's what is the intention behind pointing our attention to that activity. And so with neurodivergence, because let's just take away the neuro, because neuro means mind. That's why I have a neuro linguistic somatic experience. When we have neuro, take away the mind, then it's divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Convergent thinking, which before the 90s, especially during the Industrial Revolution, things were a lot simpler when it came to you get from this point to this point. So you start with a problem and there's one solution. Divergent thinking, you have one problem and you have multiple routes to get to the exact same solution. And so if the intention is behind solving the problem, then the focus is going to move towards it. And I see ADHD as a superpower. And the issue with ADHD is that neurodivergent thinkers are pretending to think convergently. They're trying to think as everyone else has thought before, rather than adapting and modifying their ability to think in multiple directions, multiple paths, multiple sequences of events in order to figure out the exact same thing. So the way that I use it is I try to systematize, I try to create the system in my mind to the outcome, and I refine that system, that those points, until the point it gets so simple that I feel stupid not doing it. And so it actually fast tracks goals because
Yeah.
and I think of it where it always takes less time than we think it'll take to accomplish something. And we just take forever to start. That's the part that sucks, is that we just take forever to do something. Then we remove it, then we move a little quicker.
Yeah, I think I find for me, and I have a few friends who have ADHD, diagnosed ADHD. I'm still in denial. So, but I have a few friends that are diagnosed with ADHD, and I find it's about challenge. If it doesn't challenge them and they find it boring, they just can't concentrate to do it. Whereas if you give them a level of challenge, if it's a level of difficulty, or they, like you say, they have to juggle multiple things, they're all over it, and they're better than anybody at doing that.
Totally. I would agree with that. And yep, I totally agree with that, because I it's the challenge, was it challenge skills balance? When we are refining our skills in pursuit of the outcome, which would be the challenge, then we find ourselves in a state of flow as well. And I was watching this reel the other day. It was, what was his name? The healthy gamer on Instagram. That's what it was. He was talking about how the thing that folks with ADHD have is the ability to, oh no, it was Chase Hughes. It was the ability to be able to focus much more than other folks generally. And so it's where that focus once again is pointed. That's going to be the sweet spot. And whatever that thing is, so let's say it is where it's like challenges and then you're organizing a bunch of stuff, that's keeping people engaged and keeping people into it, because they're not simply existing in a baseline. That's where the comfort is, right? Because I think it's because it's not just ADHD. Because I know a bunch of ADHD people that use ADHD in order to not do things, and so we can use it the exact same and the opposite. Let's say let's say hypothetically I was diagnosed. I use my ADHD to get things done faster than I ever thought possible, and it's a shift in the narrative. It's the exact same point, however, using it in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah, and yeah, I think from my experience, me personally, if I do have it, I don't. I'm not saying I definitely do, but from the tests and other people who have it seem to want to diagnose me all the time, which is
Yeah. I don't know what that's about, man.
I
Man.
don't know either. But they seem to want to diagnose me all the time. But anyway, I find for me mundane stuff, or like for instance, if I have to do a task and I have to go through a list, oh my god, it's mind numbing. I can do it for maybe like the first five, and then I'm bored, and then I have to go to start at the bottom of the list, and then I go to the middle, and then I like have to mix it up. I have to like my brain just can't cope with the monotony of it.
Mm. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. But anything kind of what I would describe as neurotypical or like type A personality kind of stuff, where everything's kind of laid out and methodical
Mm.
and driven that kind of way, if you know what I mean. I really
Yeah,
struggle with it. I really struggle. I start with good intentions and then I just can't. I need some sort of stimulus. I can't keep going with it.
fair, fair. That's interesting. It could be the projects too, because I would say that I work best with checklists. So if I have a checklist of some things in front of me, because what I like to do is I like to try getting it done as quickly as possible, and I don't want to think about the things I want to do. I want to see the things I want to do, and then there's just something satisfying about crossing it off. So my day to day, my average day doesn't really change. It's pretty much the exact same. However, I point my attention into specific specific things. So I'm really mindful of it. And I it's also it's also a way, so this is another thing too, is to be able to counter negative narratives is yeah, to be able to counter negative narratives is to stress test yourself and actually go into that boredom. Cuz it's also a form of resilience too. And then if it's like you can, let's say hypothetically there's the idea where uh it's hard to do the simple things because you get bored, which means it's going to be hard to do the big things because you haven't done the boring work. So with me personally, if I don't do the things, then my negative narrative comes up and it counters it. Why is it that you're not doing the things that you say you're going to do? And that, as a side effect, will have negative feels. Then I'll actually feel down on myself. And so when it has that moment of boredom, then the choice is, how do I want to feel about myself tomorrow? And is it worth it? Is it worth it pushing through that boredom? Because then boredom is actually a part of the flow state as well. Because we have the struggle, which is the boring part. Then we eventually, after about 15 to 20 minutes, unless you're doing something deep work, then we can go into 40 to 60 minutes. Uh, then we release, so struggle, then we go into releasing that struggle because the boredom's not going to last. And then we go into that flow state where everything's just smooth as can be. And then after the flow, the folks often forget about recovery. And so if we have that cyclical system, and let's say we have the intensity, let's say, yeah, intensity of doing the boring things with an athletic mind. So I'm going on the field of play to do these boring things like laundry, writing, writing something, if someone finds writing boring, and it's still going to have the outcome too. Yeah. I also heard this is another interesting one too. On another extreme end of it, I was at a friend of mine's birthday, and they were they were bonding over their mental disorders. They had a variety. They had a variety. Some of the craziest things I said was or heard was, um, "Oh, it's so awesome when you find someone that has the opposite disorder of you, because then it really like it completes you." Or it's awesome when you're on the same meds because let's say you run out, you can have your other friend. And then I had another fella that I was watching, and he was standing up, and someone was like, "Oh, why don't you sit down?" He's like, "Oh, I can't sit down. I have ADHD. When I sit down, I'm not going to get up." And so I think it's very interesting. Like I don't know. I thought that was an interesting share where folks can use that to. Mm,
Yeah, yeah, you do see that quite a lot actually. But I'm coming back a step or two to what you're saying before as well. I do think a lot of people, me included, get kind of stuck in a cycle of self sabotage almost, and don't even know you're doing it half the time, or you're not paying attention to the fact that you're doing it.
totally. Well, the way I think of self sabotage is procrastination. And procrastination I define as the active participation in preventing progress. Because self sabotage to me is, let's say you pop a tire in a car, you pull over, you get out, and rather than changing the tire, you decide to pop the other three.
Sounds like me.
Yeah. So the self sabotage is worth more than the progress. Not for you specifically. I'm just going to put that like as a thought, because
Yeah,
it comes down to survivability. Oh, I'm here. If I don't move out of here, I'm not in danger, perceived
yeah,
danger. It's like quotey fingers.
yeah. I don't. I personally don't know. Don't know the answer. I've definitely self sabotaged a lot. Where
Mhm.
I've been terrible for procrastinating, and I need like a deadline or something. I need some sort of pressure or intensity on the task for me to actually pull it out of the bag. When it's absolute chaos, that's when I'm at my best.
Yeah,
When everything's calm and just flowing along, and probably I'm looking to self sabotage to create something to give me that, probably a dopamine hit or wherever it is. But yeah, I need something to get me going.
fair. That's funny. Yeah, yeah. I think yeah. I think that's interesting because then, hmm, curiosity for this one, because self sabotage is also one of the four main points of resistance, where we're not going to do something because we're fearful. Self sabotage, procrastination, that's another point that creates resistance, judgment, and also rejection. So if we're fearful, self sabotage, rejection, or judgment, it's going to create resistance. And so that resistance that we feel in our gut, that'll linger around. And it's trying to define, what I like to do is I try to identify where exactly that resistance is from and what does that resistance feel like. Is it fear or is it excitement? Because anxiety is, I think there's a couple types of anxieties, and one of them is a narrative one where, let's say for example, you're a kid and you're getting onto a roller coaster and you feel your heart rate increase, you feel shaky, like jittery, uh, you notice that you're sweaty, and then you have one adult say, "Oh, you're experiencing fear," and then you have the other adult say, "Oh, you're experiencing excitement." And so when we go into where exactly is that feeling of resistance, what is the resistance? Am I scared? Okay, well, fear. What is fear? Acronym for that: false evidence appearing real. Where am I creating problems? Where am I creating my resistance? Where am I creating my obstacle? And then breaking down the other parts too. So self sabotage could be a feeling of resistance too. Are you resisting anything?
Well, I probably resist a lot of things, to be honest. Um, I yeah, I don't know where a lot of it comes from, and it might be fear, but I think this is the thing with it. When you do kind of self sabotage, especially if you've been doing it probably a long time, like I've been doing it now, it's one of those things where you learn to justify it to yourself as well,
Oh
and
yeah,
then you kind of keep that loop going, don't you? You kind of justify it to yourself in your own mind, and the longer you get away with it, the more you can justify it, and the more you keep going with it. So it's a difficult one, and I don't think I've ever spent the time to really sit down and look into the reasons behind it or the triggers, and it's probably something I should do, to be fair.
good. It would be the way that a really cool point of reflection is, what is that feeling? Like, take a moment and feel it. Is it joy, happiness, sadness, irritation, agitation? What is it? And then you can reflect on, when was the first time I felt this? And then you can go way back. Like some people, I've worked with some folks that are in their 40s and they had a story that was in their 20s. And then we were able to go even further back into their childhood and being able to confront that and tell the story of it and be able to read and breathe through it. So then it integrates it. because we I think it's a choice to habituate negative thoughts when we can habituate positive thoughts. Because you said it earlier where you were practicing it, you've practiced negative thoughts. It works in the opposite direction as well. And there was this fella, he worked on the software for computers. Like, he is like the godfather of computer creation. And he had an interesting thought with uh, what is what is the difference, what is free will? That's what it was. And an example of free will is when we pivot off of our own personalized algorithm. So let's say, for example, someone wakes up and they have a negative narrative. The example of free will is they say, I'm going to only think positively today, because that's counter to the algorithm that they've built up and created over time. And so it's being able to go into that and try to pivot it. And then for what I do, I actually work, I think decluttering the mind and then building it up is more important than putting positive stuff on top of the shit, because the shit's still going to be there. It's still going to stink no matter how pretty you make it. So remove that part, and then it makes it easier to go into other stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, especially if you've built up a load of shit over years and years and years, I mean, you can't just ignore it. You're going to have to do something to kind of deal with it to at least to some degree before you kind of work on kind of breaking your programming almost in it that you've kind of got into. Again, I think it's evolutionary, but as humans, we come into this kind of we create like programs for stuff, don't we, to make life easier, and so we don't have to think about things. The same as driving a car. When you start learning, you're really conscious of everything, but now we just get in and just drive like without even thinking about it. So we kind of create these processes, and that probably happens through everything we do in life, doesn't it? Even like the negative self-talk and the self-sabotage and all that stuff just becomes ingrained, and we do it without even thinking. So we kind of, at the very least, we need to pull that back into consciousness to kind of think about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another thing that ties into this as well, because with the work that I do, we focus a lot on words. And the way that I think of words is because before I was doing this, I was a personal trainer. So I have a couple fitnessy references. Uh, I look at the words as ethereal macronutrients of the mind. So, for example, for training or for nutrition, we have our carbs, fats, and proteins. These are the macronutrients, the building blocks of the body. The better the quality of the macronutrients, the better the quality of the body. I think of words is the exact same way. The content that we consume, the thoughts that we have habitually, the quality of our words is going to influence the quality of our thoughts. When we feed our mind shit words, we're going to have shit thoughts. When we feed our mind quality words, we're going to have quality thoughts. So I think that it's similar to making the choice of, are you going to drink water or are you going to have a beer? Are you going to eat candy or are you going to eat, I don't know, steak and eggs with, I don't know, I'm thinking of my favorite foods there. Steak and eggs with hash browns, potatoes. So uh, when we're thinking about it, I think when we're more mindful of it, rather than then we're able to consume and create what we listen to as well. Because the thing that we have nowadays is our phones, and if we're mindlessly consuming content, whatever it is, it's going into our mind. And so if our content consumption is lackluster or not nutrient dense in a way, then it's going to also negatively impact our thoughts too. So it's ooh, how can I put that? It's narrative. Where is it? It's mindful. It's mindful consumption of content to pivot our internal narrative to work for us rather than against us. And
Yeah,
I also think that people really enjoy watching shitty negative stuff because we do feel a physiological response. We have adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol. These are all things. If there's a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes, then it'd be useful. However, now we're actually just feeling all of these strong emotions from the thing that we're holding in our hands that we control.
Yeah, even words. So I like a part of the research I did. So I think it was the Journal of Psychiatry and Neuroscience. That's what it was, and that they they did a study, and words associated with stress and negativity actually activated the amygdala, which is the fear, the fight or flight response. So it's quite interesting how powerful words can be to, and the impact we have, let alone the devices we hold in our hands. And I think, like TikTok and Instagram and all that stuff, right? The more things that you like of a certain thing, the more stuff like that it'll show you, right? It's the algorithm, but it's the same for your brain. The more you put in that negative input, the more it's going to look for that in everything else.
Totally. Totally. Because then let's say we'll go with the self-sabotage one. Uh, then it's, oh, I'm self-sabotaging again. Clearly, I can't do the things I want. And so then it's reinforcing. We have that negative narrative, and it's reinforcing that established like that thought. And that's a place it's nice to get out of.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important that, like I say, it's important to be conscious of it first, so that you can actually try and do something to deal with it. And you said a lot of your stuff is kind of based around kind of breath work and that as well.
Mhm.
And I did find another interesting statistic that breath work has been shown to reduce cortisol, so that's the stress hormone, by 50% in
Ooh,
one of the psychology studies. So it's quite impressive that 50% is a huge chunk.
yeah. I actually I never heard of that one. That's 50% is definitely huge because then we're actually able to, well, chill and see things because our we get tunnel vision when we're agitated and stressed out and fearful and wound up.
Yeah, and we need to find that kind of balance, don't we? Because we can't really process and think logically when we're in that kind of state either. If we're overwhelmed by something, or like we're highly stressed or anxious, we're not really functioning as we should. We're just trying to survive, aren't we, at that point?
Totally. It's just what would it be? It's it's oh shit management at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh shit management at that point. Yeah, and then being able to get out of there is really good. And I actually like that. I'm going to share that stat with a couple of folks that I'll do breath work with. And that's the reason as to why I implement it. Because when I work with someone, whether it's in a group or whether it's one on one, we start with breath work and it is to down regulate or up regulate because some people could feel real low. So I want to bring them up. Some people could feel really wound up. And I say wound up as in they could be experiencing a 10 out of 10 joy or 10 out of 10 sorrow. And those are both real up there. So I like to use the breath work to bring it back to like on a scale of 1 to 10, 4, 5, 6, like a nice neutral base, and then go into the stories. Because if I'm working with someone and we're going into ouchy stories, stories that hurt, haunt, taunt, or annoy, or dreams that are nightmares, uh, I want my aim is to have folks going in with a clear head. So even if they're anxious about going into the session because they have an idea of what stories we're going to go into, it counters that. It counters that initial wound upness so that people can go in clear, chill. And now, when I get people to do that, I'm going to say it'll reduce your cortisol by 50%. That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
seems
That's
seem,
sweet.
seems to be legit. It's from a study, so it knows better than I do. I know that much.
Mhm.
But how do you get people then? So, for instance, if I wanted to get a shift, I'm pretty negative person or whatever, and I feel like I'm always negative and life's doom and gloom and awful all the time. How would you kind of get me to shift from that negative mindset into a more positive one? I'm not saying I'd flip, 180, but like into a more positive mindset.
Mm. Into a more positive mindset.
Or even to neutrality, maybe even out of negativity into a more neutral kind of space.
Oh, okay. Something something I would go with with this one specifically because I'll go with a practical piece of advice because if if we don't practice it, then it's not going to change. So I'll go with that. Something that's super simple, seemingly small, however, it can influence us quite a bit is our soft talk and our solid talk. We have our soft talk, which is unclear, ambiguous, indecisive, and then we have our solid talk, which is clear, decisive, and it makes sense. And I like to say that any statement that can be followed up with a question is not said solid enough. So, an example of what soft talk looks like, and you'll recognize all these words. I think I'm going to make it to the party for 5 p.m. I'm probably going to make it to the party for 5 p.m. I could make it to the party for 5 p.m. I should make it to the party for 5 p.m. I kind of want to go to the party for 5 p.m. So, all of those can have a question. Are you or are you not going to the party? So, it's soft. When we remove the soft talk words, so probablys, mights, coulds, shoulds, maybes, when we remove that, then it puts us in a position where we become more decisive. So then it becomes, am I going to the party? Am I not going to the party? Or I'm undecided, I'll let you know. And what happens with this is it puts us into that position of power in order to make a decision. And what this does is it's microdosing decision making. And so what will happen when we remove that soft talk and we become more decisive and we microdose it, we become more competent in our decision making. Because people can be fearful of making a decision, and it could be something simple. So let's start even lower down the line. So we're not going to go with a 200. Oh, you're in the UK. We're not going to go with a 200 kilo deadlift right off the bat. We're probably going to start with a 20 kilo bar, and then we're going to make our way up from there. So when we remove that soft talk, that's starting with the 20-pound bar. We'll recognize as we become more competent in our small decisions, it'll get us to a point as a side effect that we're going to be confident in our big decisions. And to counter negative narratives is to provide data and evidence that counters it. And so if I were to say, I am a decisive individual, however, I practice soft talk and I was actually indecisive, that's going to get me feeling pretty crappy about myself. And so if I stick to my word, then I'm going to be more decisive. And then it's going to be a lot easier to build up self respect and to develop a self image that is much more in alignment with the person that's going to be capable of accomplishing the things that you want. Because we have to become the person it takes to get what we want. Otherwise, we were only going to ever get what we've got because we're the same person that can get it. So it's an evolution of becoming the person into it. And if we see ourselves as we are and as we are, if we see ourselves as we are and always will be, then I suppose the next logical step is to be happy with what you got because it's all you're going to get.
Yeah, and yeah, I suppose there's nothing wrong with that either if that's what people want.
Oh,
But
yep,
I
exactly.
think as long as you're intentional about that and you kind of look at, is that what I want? Is that what I'm happy with, or is that where I might just sabotage it myself?
Totally. Totally.
But it's quite amazing that a couple of words, the impact a couple of words and the way we phrase things can have on our self talk and how we think about ourselves and the things that we actually listen to. Um, there's one thing that popped into my head earlier, and I forgot to mention it because we went down a different path from the start. Is that we have all this kind of negative stuff, and we choose a lot to reinforce negative stuff. Whereas, like, because I'm terrible, for instance, if somebody gives me a compliment, push that to the side. I'll just write that off. I just won't
Mm,
it won't land. I'll just kind of push it to one side, or I'll minimize it, something like that. Whereas a
mhm.
negative, I'll just agree with it, or I'll say the negative myself and get in front of it. It's strange, but that's kind of how my mind works.
Uh, you know, I had a session with a friend of mine, and it was a reflection of hers. However, I took that term because I freaking love it. It could be, I'm not saying it is, it could be that you have a shame kink. You just like to shit on yourself.
I think that's a UK wide thing, you know.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, and so yeah, I think because you said with the compliment part specifically, you don't see yourself as that person is seeing you. I would also say that because keep in mind that if someone's saying something outside of you, it is their subjective opinion, which makes it an objective observation from your perspective or our perspective. And it's it's interesting receiving a compliment because it reinforces our negative, or no, it's interesting. Something that's interesting with compliments, I'm like running through this thought as I'm speaking, so it's flowing. Yeah, it'll come down to our narrative of the self image. And we also program our reticular activating system with our words to look out for evidence that backs up who we say we are. And so if someone gave you a positive compliment, that counters your opinion of yourself. Now, if someone gave you a negative compliment, are you going to respond with, bro, you got me. You understand me. I am a piece of shit. You're right. Give it to me. Give it to me.
Yeah, I'll probably raise the ante and go, actually, let's add some of this, some put this cherry on top. Yeah,
Oh, that'd be awesome.
it's definitely that kind of confirmation bias in it it's definitely the case, and something that I'm terrible at, and I think the UK as a whole. I speak in generalities, but generally speaking, we're quite bad for that.
That's fair. Nice.
But something I need to work on. So I tell you what, if you could kind of help somebody out, so if somebody could, I don't know if it works at all this way, but they sort of give them somewhere to start. If there was one positive phrase that somebody could say to themselves before they went to sleep tonight, what would you tell them to kind of to focus on or to think about, or what kind of how to word it?
Ooh, I got 2 points on this one. If I'm to give one where it's just a statement that someone could use as a reminder, it's keep up the kindness, and it's keeping up the kindness both internally and externally. And I see kindness as a practice, not an emotion. Because when we see people being kind, we recognize it, which, in my opinion, means that we can embody kindness. And so, why wouldn't people want to be kinder to themselves or others outside of having a shame kink, of course? And then uh, another thing with that as well is when we maintain being kind, we're going to receive kindness in reciprocation. So we give the very thing that we want, and it's going to flow. Uh, when it comes to affirmations, because I would want someone to have an affirmation that is backed up by their own story, their own narrative. So not the negative one, not the I am a piece of crap. It is I am actually pretty decent. I'm actually decent. And so something that I would go with is it, someone could think of a story, and let's say it's a negative story, and it could have happened decades ago. And no matter what, everybody can say, I have survived this story. So at the end of the story, what does the story mean about me? What does the story mean to me? If I'm reading this story, and the story is an experience, dream, whatever it is, if I'm reading this story from not my perspective, like if I was a stranger and I was just reading this, how would I describe the person in this story? So that way they don't have their own opinions about themselves in it. They're seeing it objectively. And oh, this I was able to survive this experience. What would that indicate? I am a survivor. and there's the evidence to back it up. Because my definition for wishful thinking is affirmations without the evidence to back it up. So if we're going to download 102 affirmations that we're going to say every day, those are other people's affirmations that we're trying to adopt, and our behavior is not supporting that. So we don't connect with those words. So when we find the affirmations within the stories that we've already experienced, then we have the opportunity to reinforce the characteristics that we want to embody and we see our future self as. Because we have our inner rival and we have our inner role model. There's a person that's going to convince us or encourage us to stay the same. And then there's a person that we desire to become. And if we have a different reference point, then we're going to be able to have a lighthouse to guide our thoughts in a way that is more efficient and effective. And it does take participation, because if we're not directing it, then we're just going to veer towards chaos. And when we're chaotic, then we're going to shit on ourselves,
Kyle, I like that
or
actually.
should on ourselves.
Yeah, I like that actually because that is so true. Because a lot of people say about kind of manifestation and affirmations and all that kind of stuff, but ultimately you need something to hold on to, don't you? You need something to back it up. So you need to think about, the positives that you've achieved, no matter how small, and you need to kind of build them blocks up and build them brick by brick, and that's kind of how you're gonna get there. And then something else I also picked up on as well is kind of removing yourself from it, almost being detached and looking at
Mhm.
yourself as a character. I think that's really powerful as well, because then it stops that emotional need to kind of push against the compliments and against the positive stuff, and they can kind of detach from it and kind of take it in that way. So that's quite interesting way to look at things. I've never thought about doing it that way, so that's quite interesting.
Cool. Nice.
But we're coming to the end here, Carl, so I'm going to bring the episode to a close shortly. Before I do you have any kind of final thoughts or anything that you want to share with people?
I do. I do. uh, the thing I'll share is actually it's a fun one. It's the word abracadabra. Have you heard it before?
Only in the sense of magic shows.
Yeah, buddy. Whenever I ask this, I've heard magic shows, I've heard Pokemon, and I've also heard Steve Miller Band. Those are when
Oh
people think
yeah,
of
Steve Miller, yeah,
abracadabra.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Abracadabra is an old language. It's Aramaic. It's about 3,000 years old. And abracadabra translated to English is with my words I create. So, how you mentioned how brick by brick, words brick by brick build up the foundations of our inner sanctum, our inner world, our inner reality. And then it's going to adjust our external world as well. And so that's one part where with our words we create. Words being the ethereal macronutrients is going to improve the quality of the body, the quality of the mind. And then we take these words and we spell them out. We create spells. And the definition of spells are words or a collection of words of great influence. So with our words, we create and inspire great influence. Yeah.
I like that, and I've learned something new there because I never knew that abracadabra. I just never even thought about it, to be honest. I just thought it was a throwaway word that people made up to do magic.
Well, that is true too, just in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, no, I like that. I like that. I like the meaning behind it, and how to use that. That's pretty cool. Cal, if somebody wants to kind of learn a bit more about you or about kind of the practices that you use and stuff, where can they connect with you?
The easiest place, well, if they want to check out my work, clarityconsultant.ca is where they can find all the stuff. And then if they want to have a conversation and chat with me directly, Instagram's my easiest or the fastest response time. And all my social handles are the same. It's at Dapper Dude Kyle, DapperDudekyle. And that's it.
Brilliant, no problem at all. I'll connect with you on there as well, definitely,
Sick.
and then but I'll share in the show notes so people can kind of get in touch and see what we're up to, because I've loved every bit of it. It's been a brilliant conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us today. So thank you so much.
Dude, honestly, I freaking love it. This is fun. I love
Yeah,
the opportunity. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing.
Cheers, man. Thanks a lot. Take care.
No worries. Whew, I'm gonna use the washroom